start time, so I'd be happy to kick us off. I'm Jennifer Hinkel. For those who don't know me, I've been working with the data economics company for a couple of years now, first as part of the Research Alliance. My background really is from the biotech and healthcare world. So it's been a great learning for me to be able to hear from these guys who have so much experience in industrials, manufacturing, metals, topics that really I had never thought very much about in my career. And it's been fantastic to learn from both of you and from some of your colleagues. So I'm excited today that the topic we're addressing is around lead batteries, which if you're sitting in the US, this might not be something that you give a lot of thought to. You kind of get one and put it in your car, or maybe someone else does that for you. But the supply chains for this look quite different around the world. And my perception of the issue and the problem at hand here is that in some countries, lead batteries can escape the supply chain. The supply chain we'd like them to be in is that they would go into a kind of certified licensed recycling facility. And if I'm getting this wrong, guys, please feel free to jump in and correct me. Again, I have kind of the very basic understanding of this compared to both of you. But the idea would be that these batteries would be recycled in a licensed facility that extracts the most metal out of them to reuse so that we're not wasting lead. Lead is also a very heavy metal to be shipping all around the world. So we don't want to be wasting it at all. And then put into new batteries to use. Unfortunately, in some parts of the world, because lead is also a very valuable metal, there are people who feel incentivized to kind of take things out of that licensed supply chain or regulated supply chain and do things like, I guess it's smelt it down or melt down batteries and informal channels. And when that happens, we get a lot of pollution in the ground. We get negative impacts to public health, certainly negative impacts to the folks who are handling those metals who may not be aware of the danger and the personal risk that lead poisoning may present to them. And not only is it economically kind of not good in the big picture, but it's environmentally and from a public health standpoint, not good in the big picture. So today, joining me, we have PRADEEP GOYAL, we have VIPIN TYAGI. I'm going to let both of you introduce yourselves and talk a bit about, what brought you to this field and this problem and what your background is.
Go ahead, VIPIN. Sure.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was a great introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is VIPIN TYAGI. I'm the CEO of VIPIN Chemicals. We are a clean technology company in the battery recycling space with an initial focus on the lead batteries. We have been working on this problem for the last 7 years now. Our goal is to recycle these batteries with zero pollution. We have already developed the technology at commercial scale, which is operating in India right now on the outskirts of New Delhi. We are in the process of commercializing the technology further. We are working with the industry partners globally. As Jennifer mentioned, these batteries are like omnipresent. Everybody uses them. They're used in your cars. They're used in your trains, aeroplanes, defense equipments, you just name it. They are also the most recycled item in the world. Close to 100% of all batteries of these kind are recycled. Having said that, this recycling is an awesome thing. It keeps this hazardous waste out of the ground. But the way they are recycled currently is extremely polluting. Even in places like US, where US as a country has the toughest norms for recycling of these batteries globally, you still find instances wherein the recyclers don't play by the rules. And we have instances in Texas, in California, in Louisiana, and the most recent one in Florida, wherein they have found huge amounts of lead waste being dumped illegally. Instances of the pollution control equipments not working out correctly, and you find the lead dust as far as 100 miles away from the facility. Now, if you can imagine this is happening in a place like US, what is going to happen in countries like India, Brazil, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, you just name it. So this is the problem we are trying to tackle. With the growing focus on electrification of everything, the amount of battery usage is going to increase exponentially. People talk about electric vehicles. They use lithium-ion batteries, which is a sort of a substitute for an internal combustion engine, but they still use a lead battery. And people are still trying to figure out how to recycle these lithium batteries, for example. So it's an open problem as of today. Nobody has been able to crack that. We just don't know about the scale of the issues that are going to come down the line in like the next 5 to 10, 15 years, because these batteries have a much longer shelf life. With that, I'll let Mr. Goyal introduce himself, and then we can take it forward. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pradeep Goyal. I'm from Mumbai. Thanks for inviting me to this event. I have a background in metallurgy. I got my master's degree at MIT and went back to India to run a manufacturing company to make metal components. And so I've been doing that for the last 40 years. And I got in contact with VIPIN when I met him in Houston, and we talked about a new technology for recycling of lead batteries in a cleaner manner. And that got me excited, and I decided to work with him to see how we can bring this new technology to India, because the scale of problem in India is huge. And we both recognize that this needs to be taken care of. And together we decided that we'll approach all the government authorities or whoever it takes to make sure that we try to bring the entire recycling business into the formal structure rather than most of it going into the informal structure. So there are challenges in India which we are all aware of, and in whatever way I can support this activity by using the government infrastructure with which I'm very familiar in India, we would like to take this forward and make sure that we come up with a very robust system which helps not only the recyclers who are presently doing the business, but also any newcomers who come with new technologies, so that the government is a beneficiary, the people are beneficiaries, and the environment is a beneficiary. So those are the opening remarks I would like to make for this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so I really would like to get into in this session the different solutions we've been talking about, especially with how digital data can help us track batteries really through their whole life cycle and how that might scale, how it might apply to other metals. But before we get into that, I just glanced at the attendees list. I know there are a bunch of people, it looks like, in that list who are friends of mine that don't come from a background that includes industrial kind of materials topics. So it would be great to hear from you a little bit about the scope of the problem, the size of this market. I think it's probably much larger than many people realize. So are there some numbers that you could help us with to put some better understanding around how big of a problem are we dealing with?
Sure, I can take that one on. So if you just talk about the lead market by itself, it is worth close to $35 billion globally.
Wow.
Out of that, close to $17–18 billion of lead of this metal is being produced from recycling alone. US is still the second biggest market. I mean, China is not the biggest market when you consider everything nowadays, but US is the second biggest market in the world. In US, about $3 billion worth of lead is being produced every year. And all the production of lead in US is now from recycling. US stopped producing mined lead about 5 years back. So all of the mined ores are now going down to China and some other countries in the world, but there's no more primary production of lead in US. And since we're dealing with India, the market size for India is about $2 billion a year. India has its own challenges, and I'm sure we'll get into those things down the line, wherein India has a big informal sector as well. Mm-hmm. And those are India-specific sort of challenges. India and sort of India-like countries, if you want to call that, like challenges. Those kind of challenges don't exist in places like US or Europe. So the market size, as I said, it runs into billions of dollars, and it's growing. Mm-hmm. The battery market itself is worth hundreds of billions of dollars globally, because I'm just talking about the size of the market for lead. Now, this is then packaged into batteries, which are then sold to the consumers.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting to mention. And I just as an aside had done some reading on the mining for lithium, for all these lithium batteries, and the impact that has on the countries where that's taking place. I mean, do you know what kind of countries some of the lead mining is taking place? Because I'm sure this has an impact there as well.
Sure. So number one mining country is still China. Then you have some deposits in India, Kazakhstan, some of the countries in South America, for example. US has some deposits, but as I said, US has stopped. US is still mining, but it has stopped producing lead from those mined ores.
Got it. And then when we look from the business and enterprise side of this, who are some of the big players involved, either in the lead metal market or in the battery manufacturing and recycling market?
Sure. So the biggest battery manufacturer sits in the US. It's a company called Clarios. It was formerly known as Johnson Controls. They're the number one battery manufacturer, with manufacturing and recycling operations all across the globe. Then you have manufacturers, again, pretty much in every country. So China has its own ecosystem. India has its own ecosystem. Then the recycling is pretty much a localized operations because lead is very heavy. These batteries are hazardous waste because they have a very hazardous sulfuric acid inside the batteries. So it's very difficult to actually transport them globally. As a matter of fact, the Basel Convention does not allow transport of hazardous waste. Having said that, illegal transport still happens. So for example, US is not a signatory to the Basel Convention, but still the batteries from US end up in India through various means, through illegal channels, and we read them about all of these things all the time. India specifically is sort of, the market is sort of controlled by like 3 major manufacturers who control about 60% of the battery market. The recycling market is much more fragmented. 2 or 3 big recyclers. Other than that is pretty much all small players, SMBs, which are trying to sort of just get by.
No, thank you. And so I'd like to go to Pradeep now. Mr. Goyal, can you help the audience understand a bit about what the government in India has tried to do in regards to this problem, and why is this such a difficult problem to get a hold of? Why is it so hard to kind of capture batteries and keep them in that closed loop rather than letting them escape into these informal markets where pollution might happen, et cetera, or even, maybe more of the formal recyclers, but using very high environmental impact processes when there could be better processes out there?
See, the government of India has their own battery management and handling rules, which were recently also upgraded to bring in some sort of regulation into this entire market. But like any other law, its law is there unless it is properly implemented or taken care of by the authorities that are required to do so. And for that, the government has 2 mechanisms. One is the Central Pollution Control Board that formulates all the rules and regulations. And these are to be implemented by the states. So just like here, you have a federal system, the states take care of all of these activities. Now at the state level, my understanding is that the pollution control system is so overloaded with so many other pollution systems. Let's say we have steel making, we have cement manufacturing. Those are such large polluters of the environment that this has probably not yet gained the prominence that it is required at the state level. Of course, the Indian subcontinent, along with many other countries in Asia, does have its own underworld issues. So those are the issues also that come into play when such activities are going on. So the government has not yet been able to get to this problem the way it should. And it's very difficult. Here are people, so it's all encompassing. It starts from you. You go to a battery dealer to get a battery change. You give it your own old battery, pick up a new one, put it in, he does it, and he just keeps the battery, right? What does he do with it? He's by law required to send it to a official recycler, right? But he doesn't do that. He just gives it to a guy who comes on a small vehicle, puts it in his vehicle and takes it away, and he just gets cash. So the underhand economy has a lot to play in this also. The government has taken a lot of steps to get away from this. It's been about 4 or 5 years when the government brought in the goods and services tax in the country, which kind of enforced people to sign up for that, so that whenever they do any sales or purchase, they have to go through that system. It's taking a while. It's a one tax all over the country. So the government is trying to curb this kind of a problem of underhand dealings by goods and services tax laws. So we'll have to wait and watch. So the Pollution Control Board and the tax laws, these two will have to come together and share data. That's where you guys come in. So that once that data sharing happens, then we'll be able to tackle this a little better.
Yeah, and I really like that you brought that up, because I think in so many of these problem sets or use cases that we've been chatting about, whether it's the ones I'm more familiar with in the healthcare sector, or whether it's this one in batteries and some of the things we've talked about in industrials, overall, I really see that there are two areas of the problem set. There's the technical area and getting all of that data. How do you put the infrastructure in place for the data to communicate and to be tracking the right things? And so when we think about batteries, it's things like, how do we make sure that the consumer maybe knows where they're dropping off the battery, when that battery gets dropped off, somehow there's a serial number tracking thing, whether that's a number you punch in or a QR code or barcode that you take a photo of with your mobile device. And at the end of the day, those are really, I mean, not that technical problems are super easy to solve, but those are solvable problems. And I think it's interesting to talk about the other side of that, which is in my mind, the consensus generation, the policy development, the alignment of incentives. I mean, my hope is always that when you get the data piece right, it makes it much easier to align incentives, because when there's transparency, much less information asymmetry, and the potential for people to really see what's happening in the value chain. And it's harder to kind of point fingers at the other guys, right? To say, oh, this is the distributor's problem, or it's the problem of these informal, I think I've got the word right. Is it Kabawala guys, like picking up, these batteries and dropping them off at different places? Maybe we need to make sure that people in that role are not losing incentives or losing income in this. But in my thought, the technology and the policy piece have to kind of play together. So with that in mind, I mean, are there policy incentives, are there tax incentives you think that could help alter this equation?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way, if you look at the problem, it's not that difficult to handle. If you look at the distributor of the batteries who actually sells it to the retailer, if you control it at that stage, and the laws are like that if a distributor sells X number of batteries, he has to bring X, or at least 90% of X, back to the recycler. Okay, so that rule is there. Now, as far as the retailer is concerned, if you start plugging into his database and say that he also has an obligation that the number of batteries sold by him will equal or some percentage of it goes back to the recycler, it should be possible to do that. So if you have a cradle to grave kind of a marking or a traceability of the battery, and you trace it all the way down to where it goes into the recycler, I think it should be able to come in. As far as tax are concerned, if you look at the profit that these guys make, the underground, recyclers, that is almost equal to the goods and services tax. So if the government were to remove that goods and service tax on this section, on the retailer for the used battery, the problem would just vanish. Right? I mean, you could just, the underground guys won't have any feet to stand on. The official recycler could then be able to get it at the same price.
That's really fascinating to me, because I think that really just shows how the economic levers and the data levers have to work together. So with that, I'll go over to VIPIN, and I'll ask if you can talk a little bit about how does the digital data and traceability part play into this market, and can you talk a little bit about the work that we've been talking about doing together and how this all comes together?
Sure. So basically, as been told by Mr. Goyal and we have been discussing, if we can have traceability of the metal flow, that gives a lot of insights into what is really happening at what stage. right? So right now the value chain is so much fragmented. All right. I mean, going from the battery manufacturer to the dealer distributor, this is still okay. But anything that goes after the dealer stage is totally unknown. So as a part of the work that we've been doing together, the goal is to sort of digitally map the value chain from the cradle to the grave, in a sense, right? And give the technology tools to the right stakeholders in that value chain, so that you can digitally trace the metal flow and digitally trace all the data that is associated with that metal flow, right? So for example, if I'm shipping from player A to player B, what are all the documentations that are required as per compliance? Now, the eventual goal will be like, once you start mapping this value chain and start incorporating all these stakeholders in this value chain, then in the overall terminology for Lydian, you will start forming these data economic networks, which then become extremely powerful. And you can then try to start bringing in the regulators as well, because then it makes their lives easier. So the idea will be to create win-win-win for pretty much everybody. Now, having said that, the data will play a role and the taxation incentives will play a role. As Mr. Goyal mentioned, the tax leakage because of the incorrect incentives is huge. I mean, it amounts to more than 10% of the value of the metal itself. Wherein, if you look at any of the bigger recyclers, they operate at a profit margin of about 3 to 5%, as it is with any other commodities. So if somebody has an incentive which is twice as big, if you were going to play by the rules, then I mean, it's pretty much a known thing that you will try to avoid to play by the rules in that case. Everybody understands the downside risk of doing that in terms of pollutions and the other things that happen. But I'm a firm believer that in the end, economy always wins. The market principles, the market spirits, most of the times will win until unless you put a hammer to it. And there are limits to putting a hammer to things, right? So, so the work that we have been doing together, I believe that it has the potential to sort of start changing the rules of the game. So that once we have the insight, then you can exactly point to the right stakeholder, hey, you need to stop the leakage at this particular point and at that particular point, so on and so forth.
I mean, I liked what you said about creating a win-win-win situation for all of the players in this chain. I mean, do you or Mr. Goyal, do you see any resistance? Who will be difficult to bring on board with this, and thoughts about who will come on board first?
I can take that one first, and then I'll let Mr. Goyal speak after that. I believe that the battery manufacturers will come up first. The last players to come on board will be the dealers, because they have the most to lose. The distributors will come on, the recyclers will come on, or the recyclers playing by the rules, recyclers will come on, but the dealers, because they lose on their cash income, which is not subject to income tax. So they will start to play roles. I mean, imagine when you go to an AutoZone, right? It carries batteries from every brand. Same is the case in India. The dealers will carry batteries from every brand. So they'll start to play these battery manufacturers. Like if you have one battery manufacturer who sort of becomes more strict with them, they will start sort of slowing down the sales of that particular battery manufacturer as compared to other ones. And this we have been told in informal discussions with the battery manufacturers. And that is one of the main reasons that they have not been able to sort of crack down on this behavior at the dealer level.
Got it. So maybe the government does need to help ensure an even playing field here. That no one really wants to be the first one out of the gate to say we're going to be much more strict, because that might drive business to their competitors, which won't be popular.
I'd like to add a couple of things here. We are losing one big sector, the automotive sector, into this whole scheme of things. The battery manufacturers are one, but who are their consumers? The primary consumers also are the car manufacturers, truck manufacturers, or the OE sales of all these battery manufacturers. So they have to be brought on board. And many of these companies are multinational companies, and they work with laws which relate to their own countries. And they are very concerned about the environment, health and safety, and all those laws. if they start becoming
Absolutely.
strict, because I know that in my own company, the auditors, the customers don't come and audit me on my ISO or any of those things. These days, they come and audit on health, safety, and environment, right?
Yes.
So whether my company is taking care of that. Same way, all these auto companies, if they were to put their foot down and tell the recyclers that, hey, unless you buy your lead from the right source, from the official recyclers, we are not going to buy batteries from you. That will be a pressure point. Two other pressure points can be the industry associations. In India, we have two large, associations, the Confederation of Indian Industry and the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce. So these are two large bodies. If we are able to get traction from them and the council that designs the laws for the GST, what we call the sales generalized tax system, if we bring these people and bring the policymakers, and the highest policymaker is the policy-making body of the government. So if we can push that, and we have tried to do that in the past, and they're very receptive, that if we go to them with a proper solution, they are willing to play ball with us. So we are looking for a right solution to present to them, and I'm sure that we can have the government's attention to take care of this problem.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer and that insight. And you know, as you're talking about some of these larger players, like you're talking about the like the automotive industry players and the responsibilities they have towards the environmental and sustainability goals that they're articulating out to their customers. You know, I know, Vipin, we've talked about how this is not, I mean, even if you think about batteries in India and we're focusing on India, I mean, those batteries and the lead there may touch a number of global markets, and these may come from other places. So do you have any thoughts on that as well, and how this plays into the kind of the optics and the marketing of these large companies, whether they're in the US or in Europe?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And this is one of being our sort of pitch points to one of our main customers in India, Luminous, which is a part of a very big European group. So their main concerns are around ESG, are around health and safety. So, and they understand that even though if they're buying lead locally for somebody in India, that the supply chain is being touched through multiple countries. For example, most of the bigger recyclers in India are importing batteries. Now, those imported batteries, the typical initiating point is Africa, but Africa is sort of a illegal dump place for batteries coming in from South America, from Europe, and even some parts of Asia. So first they come to Africa, they get broken down in a very, very unsafe manner. And then the lead components are then shipped over to India for recycling. So as a part of the traceability platform that we have been working together on, the goal will be to sort of trace this whole value chain, going in from the scrap all the way to the component level, to the recycler, to the refiner, to the alloyer, to the battery manufacturer, distributor, dealer, and then we have to close the loop. This is on the secondary production side. Now, then you also have to include the producers who are now producing, who are actually producing the metal from the ores, right? So all of that also has to come in, because, for example, some of the batteries require high purity metal. So that comes in from the primary side of it. So you will have a manufacturer like Clarios who will take 70-80% of recycled lead and 20% of primary lead. So even for them to have transparency, you need to include both the chains. And for example, just in December of last year, the new battery directive for EU has come out. And they have proposals that starting 2025, the battery manufacturers need to tell how much is the amount of recycled content, show us the traceability of the metal, which is there. And this will be applied all across the value chains of all batteries. So having said that, so for example, tomorrow this platform can be extended over to other metals as well. There's nothing so special about lead as far as the traceability platform is concerned. So the idea is that you can first prove it at one point, and then you can extend it to other metals.
No, that's great. I live not far from where Tesla has opened a factory, and I'm seeing more and more Teslas in this area. And I keep thinking about, one of the things that I keep thinking about is the consumer mind here. The consumer thinks they're doing like a really fantastic thing for the environment because they're getting into a car that is electric and battery powered rather than a car that is powered by, gas or diesel. And at the end of the day, yeah, you still have to create the energy somewhere. So it's not only the charging of those batteries that's a concern, but it's also what happens to those batteries after their lifespan. And lithium is, another metal that is really very valuable at this point. It has had, the mining of lithium has had, some pretty negative impacts in some of the countries where it's being extracted from, both in the environmental and public health, like downstream effects from that, also in terms of like economic exploitation of workers. So I could see that consumers get smarter around these topics. I mean, batteries were never something I ever thought about until I started talking to you guys, and now it's something I'm thinking about all the time. But I think as consumers get smarter on these topics and consumers want to be making decisions that are good for the environment, good for the world and for health and worker safety and all of those things, I would hope that this becomes something consumers can also help pressure the companies that they're buying from about. So one of the things that just popped into my mind, maybe we need like a Netflix documentary on what is really happening in batteries and the dangers here. I think it's something consumers have not considered before, but I would hope that it would be something we can help educate people about.
No, absolutely. I mean, there was just a recent report which came out from UNICEF, which mentioned that 1 in 3 kids globally have exposure to lead.
Wow.
That's about 800 million kids all around the world. That's a huge
number.
It's
a huge number.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and going forward, the batteries are going to increase. I mean, if you want to set up more solar power plants, you need batteries, right? More number of EVs, more batteries. So irrespective of the battery chemistry, the world is moving towards more and more electrification, which will require more and more battery usage. So that is bound to happen. So the world needs to find sustainable solutions for the end of life solutions for all of these batteries.
Talked about awareness. You remember the movie Erin Brockovich, right? I mean, that's how the awareness about that significant problem came about.
Yeah.
And that's really desirable, that somebody who should take up this issue, which is, it's a burning issue in many parts of the world. So might be a good idea to suggest.
I mean, we've mentioned India. I've read about this problem now in Indonesia. I've read about it in Brazil. Certainly there are impacts to Africa, especially when Africa is being used as kind of an intermediary dumping ground for some of these materials. And then I'm sure that it's an issue in places that we haven't even thought about before. I'm sure there's some of this happening in China as well. And, and then in other kind of emerging markets where these incentives may not be completely aligned for people to keep the metals in a proper and regulated supply chain. So yeah, I do think that the consumer piece and the awareness piece are important and may go hand in hand with motivating governments to look at the tax incentives, look at the potential to enforce regulation. And as we said, I mean, at the end of the day, having the traceability and the data transparency to actually understand where is this piece of physical material coming from, traveling across the world, how did it get to me and into my car? I think that will be extraordinarily valuable in helping to change the landscape of this problem. So with that, I'd like to take some questions from the audience. We have one that popped up here. The first one is, can data be used as an economic incentive in this case?
Yes, it can be. It can be because most of the times when you return your old battery, you get a small amount of money back, right? So for example, in US, it's typically anywhere between $5 to $15, right? So the amount of cash back that you get in emerging countries is even higher because the value of the metal inside that old battery is a lot more. So if tomorrow, if we are able to sort of set up this whole data economic network, there are ways to incentivize the end consumer. There are ways to incentivize all the stakeholders in the value chain appropriately, so that, for example, I mean, let's just talk about the Indian thing, right? There is enough money in the pot on the tax leakage that is happening right now. If that can be distributed well and wisely among the stakeholders, there's more than enough money to be given to everybody to make everybody happy and still do it correctly, right? So yes,
I think you had sent to me a note earlier that said you think it's $200 to $250 million a year that the government is losing out on in tax leakage.
Yes.
So you're saying we take that 200 to 250 mil, we redistribute it as an incentive or reward among the people that are playing by the rules, and that makes everybody happy, and they get that incentive when they can kind of show their little ticket of data that says, hey, I did the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was a small example we talked about also earlier, and that was that, let's say I send my car for a battery change, and typically my driver would go and do that, right? So if he told the driver that you take a picture of the battery when you're returning it and upload it to a particular website, okay, so the guy who has received that used battery, the retailer knows that the picture of that battery is uploaded somewhere, so he cannot give it to the underhand guys to do this work. So that's and the driver gets a couple of bucks.
Yep.
To upload that picture. I mean, that's a great incentive for the driver. I mean, I don't care. He makes a couple of bucks, but at least he's doing his part to save the environment.
Yeah, and I like this idea too of making sure that people who are kind of in these intermediary positions aren't completely cut out from being able to, you know, make a living or get little rewards for doing the right thing. But I think, you know, I like the idea that the reward for doing the right thing could be bigger than the reward for doing the wrong thing.
Yep.
So I've got another question coming in here about NGOs, non-governmental organizations, nonprofit organizations, and international organizations. Are any of these supporting these initiatives? What would be the role of such organizations in helping to solve this problem?
Sure. So there are a few ones. One of the biggest ones is called Pure Earth. They are focused on this problem itself, on the problem of actually pollution of lead, and they are very active in India and most of the Southeast Asian countries. But their work is, as of now, mostly around cleaning up. So they go to these old sites, for example, they will clean up the soil, they'll clean up, you know, the amount of the solid waste that has been dumped around.
Yeah.
But it is not still up to a level where they can have the ear of the governments. So they operate at a very small local levels. The funding amount they have is pretty small. But from a work perspective, they are doing very good work. I know the folks, they're headquartered out of New York, and they have a pretty big presence in India as well. For example, recently they did some work in the state of Bihar in India, where they found out that at one place, almost 90% of the elementary school kids were infected by lead because there were a bunch of illegal smelters operating out in that area. So
yeah, I mean, that's sad to hear. That's good work that they're doing. And I know you had mentioned UNICEF as well, trying to bring awareness to the lead poisoning issue. I mean, it's just unfathomable to me that in the US, you know, every time you buy or sell a house in the US, there has to be a declaration of things like lead paint, because we take that very seriously in terms of the risk to children. And I think this other risk globally to children of lead poisoning from batteries just it's not something I've heard talked about a lot here. And I think that it should be talked about. This is a big issue when you're talking about that many children being impacted.
No, absolutely. And, you know, if you just Google the most polluted industry in the world, what comes out is the secondary smelting of lead. That is the most polluted industry in the world, more than, you know, the steel production or cement production or whatever you want to call it. So,
I think advocacy is something that's really missing here. Is a serious level of advocacy, maybe at the United Nations level. I don't know which agency of UN can do it. Is it the development UNDP, or which agency can take up this issue at a larger level, at the government's level? Okay, maybe then the governments will listen. You know, small NGOs, when they come and talk to the government, they listen, but then they say, okay, you know, you came, you talked, and you went. So that's what's happening. So you need a larger level advocacy there.
I agree.
Yeah, it's actually one of the audience questions is around the challenges that you both have faced in bringing awareness to this issue, whether in India or in other countries. Are there any practical steps people can take to get governments to take this more seriously and to get them to create the right kinds of incentives around this?
We did do that. We went and met the policy making body of the government, and we actually met the CEO of that policy making body. He was extremely receptive, and when we suggested to him that we can use data as one of the methods, he was extremely excited and said, "Whenever you're ready with that, come back to me." Okay, so we do have his ear to listen to us. So we are waiting that one day when we have a nice little package to show him, we can go back to him. And like I said before, there are two large industry associations, and if we are able to present to them a real case saying that here is what the problem is, and here is where how kids are getting affected, or the UNICEF agencies or something, then I'm sure that the government will start listening to what's happening.
Yeah, I'm going to text my friend at UNICEF right after this panel.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make sure he watches the video. So another question from the audience: what are the practical next steps in creating both the technology systems and the economic incentives to create solutions that ensure that batteries go into the legal recycling channel? Can the audience help? And how long until these solutions become realistic and real world supply chains? Which I would say, I think we're pretty close to getting these things into the real world.
Yes, we are. I mean, we are pretty close to taking our first sort of an iteration of the product to the industry as far as the actual platform goes. Having said that, I think once we have sort of an initial stakeholder buy-in for the product, the next step will be to sort of start talking to the policymakers that, hey, this is a solution that can be presented. This is how you can come in. Because I believe, once we have, and even a small solution that can be presented, talking about the problem is one thing, but if you can present the solution to them, then it becomes a much easier talk to have with them.
Absolutely.
I think that's the approach we're taking. I'm very hopeful that, with the developments in the technology, for example, what we have done at our company personally, so we will have the challenges of the supply chain as far as our company is concerned, but at least we have solved the part of the pollution aspect of the recycling of batteries. So now that will take up a few years scaling up, because these are big projects where you have to build the machinery, set up the machinery, get the permits in place. So there's a natural lead time to these kind of solutions being implemented on the ground. But as far as the digital traceability platform solution is concerned, I think that the adoption can be significantly faster for that once we have the initial stakeholder buy-in, and that's what we're trying to do out there. Once we have the data transparency coming around, that will sort of again help with the advocacy part of it, because we know exactly where the leakages are happening, how much the leakage is, so on and so forth.
Mr. Goyal, any other thoughts on that as well?
I think, the 2 points that, Vipin said are correct, that alternative technologies have to come in, which are not polluting in nature. So you don't, the easiest way, it's like the Chinese backyard iron industry. If I remember 40 years, 50 years ago, every backyard in China would bring iron ore from somewhere, melt it with some coal and make iron and just sell the iron. And this was like, the huge polluting industry until China woke up to that, and, they started making large plants. But similarly, the same thing is happening here, that every backyard in certain areas of the country, people just dig a deep hole, put some batteries in there, just melt it, and the acid goes in the ground, and the vapor, the dust particles of lead go into the air, and whatever lead they are able to get, it's just, they sell and they make money out of that. So whatever money they can make out of it, that's money. So until we are able to bring the attention of the government to this problem, it's not going to stop, and that's where we are right now.
Yep. So one more question that ties in with that around the economics of this whole problem. One of the audience members writes to us: the idea of eliminating the tax on batteries so that the informal sector loses its cost advantage is interesting. But if you eliminate government revenues from this sector, would there be a loss of motivation to also enforce rules around recycling? And would it not create additional downward pressure on the value of lead or batteries?
I can take that one. Actually, no. So the way it really works out right now is basically the GST tax in India. The way it works is you get an offset for the input. Now, if these old batteries can be reused for something else, then the government will have a loss of that. But these batteries are only going to be recycled. So once these batteries go bad, they can only have two options: either you just thrown away or you have to once it is recycled, only produce lead, which will be used in making new batteries. So, for example, irrespective of how much of the tax I'm paying on these old batteries, I always get an offset once I sell the finished metal. Now, if you talk about the battery manufacturer, they will get an offset on the tax they have paid on the input metal side. So in the end, all that the government is collecting is the delta between the tax that is paid by the eventual consumer of the battery and the amount of the input tax that was paid by the battery manufacturer. All the initial taxes are offsets. Now what is happening is the informal sector takes advantage of this initial taxation on the batteries, which is huge. And they have found a mechanism of utilizing shell companies and whatnot. So by the time the government is able to realize that, hey, we have lost tax, these guys are already gone. And some new companies have. So actually, if you can eliminate the taxes on the scrap batteries, the government will start to realize more money, because all of that material will start to come back into the formal sector, right? So instead of losing on the revenues, they will actually start making more revenue. So you will start to eliminate the formal sector, the informal sector, and all of the business will start to come back into the formal sector. Mr. Goyal can add on top of that.
No, I agree with you because there is no incentive for the formal sector to get into this. So the informal sector doesn't pay any taxes, and they move from one place to the other, and they're gone here today, gone tomorrow. So that's what's happening. And so they don't pay taxes, and the government is losing out on that tax in any case. They're not getting that tax.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I mean, this is, I couldn't have answered that question, so I really appreciate that you two did. And I think I'm going to need you to explain it to me again one day with a whiteboard and tracing how all of this money flows, because I just find it really fascinating that the transparency, that the data traceability, and kind of that entire using the data to create that visibility through the supply chain, I think would just bring so much value in terms of reducing these information asymmetries. I mean, if it was not possible to kind of sneak these things out of the regulated channel to get those benefits, financial benefits, I think you can close the loop pretty quickly.
Yep.
Because you reverse the way the incentives work. So I think we have time for maybe one last question, maybe two, depending on how long we chat for. But another question back into this whole problem around awareness. The audience member writes, almost every person who has owned a car has dealt with changing batteries. Why aren't consumers more aware of this problem? How can we make consumers and grassroots more aware? And how can we activate consumer demand that their batteries go into legal channels?
I can take that one, because it's so easy for somebody to change the battery and just move on. They don't care what happens after that. But as far as, jokes aside, as far as the awareness is concerned, I think from the advocacy part, it is missing, right? People hear a lot more about plastics because they see it all the time. Batteries are something that once you have to change it, it's out of your mind, it's out of your eyesight, right? It's in your car. You only worry about it when your car is not starting up, right? So I think that part is one part. I think advocacy, once it is done correctly and people start to understand the downside risks that it pertains to everybody's health, globally, I think then the consumer pattern can start to change. But again, for countries like India or Brazil, for example, or Southeast Asia, the economic incentives have to work out, because the amount of money that you get back for the old battery, right, is almost like around 3 to 4x what you get back in the US. So for somebody who only makes, say, about $1,000 a month, and these are like upper middle class folks in India, right? For them, if they can get an additional $10 out of the old battery, it's a substantial amount of money they can get back. So for them, the incentive is not there to, just give it to the formal sector. They will go and talk to the dealer, and if the dealer is willing to pay them a bit more, they really don't care, because as I said, you change the battery, out of sight, out of mind, kind of a thing.
And it happens once in 2 or 3 years.
Exactly.
Plastic you see every day.
Right.
So this is once in 3 years, it's gone, forgotten.
I mean, the more efficient we make batteries, the less we think about this problem.
Absolutely. I just want to add one more thing. People also don't realize the amount of plastics that are used in these batteries. Just the sheer amount of plastics being used, just to give you an idea, the amount of plastics used in just the Indian market itself is close to 700,000 metric tons per year. Now you can calculate the amount of water bottles you can actually manufacture using 700,000 metric tons of plastic.
Yeah.
So
which is funny because we've gotten all on this train of eliminating single-use plastics, and somehow we were able to get that message across to people. But I don't think anybody would, look, I think if in the US, if you walk down the street and you asked 3 people what's in a car battery, I don't know that they could tell you any of the specific materials in the car battery. They might be able to say, I think it has some plastic, maybe it runs on, there's some lead, there's some battery acid. But that's a great, that's a great point. I think there are maybe some other aspects of this that we could bring in to raise awareness. My thought is, we need to get either some people talking about this on TikTok for the younger generations, or maybe the ages that are getting into their first cars. So they're thinking about that. I do think that this would be a wonderful documentary. I don't think people are connecting that thought of this battery that I'm using to start my car every day. The lead, like the impact that lead could have if it's melted down and, gets into the ground, and the dust is affecting, children in other parts of the world. It's really, it's like that butterfly effect of everything that you do has that downstream impact, and folks are not thinking about that when it comes to batteries. So I really appreciate that comment. And then let's see. Oh, one more question from the audience about who would be the mascot character for this. So for ocean plastic, we had sea turtles. For global warming, we had polar bears. That's a great question. I mean, I think, to me, it's really like this impact on children. It's this impact on children. And the thought that, when kids have lead poisoning and lead impact, I mean, you're taking away their opportunity for learning, their opportunity for their own self-development. I mean, it's a hugely tragic impact. That's why we've made such a big issue about this in parts of the world when it comes to lead paint and removing those potential toxicities. To me, this is just as big of an issue.
And look at the acid in the ground. I mean, you're killing the ground.
Yep.
Here on one hand, we are talking about organic foods, and on the other hand, you got acids, sulfuric acid going into the ground. What's going to happen to that ground?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I appreciate both of you being here with me today, because we've educated, I think, at least a few more people about this problem. This will make a fantastic recording that will be able to educate many more people out there in the world as we continue to talk about this issue. VIPIN, it's been a pleasure to work with you on the digital traceability initiatives, Mr. Goyal on the initiatives around the government agencies, as well as the trade associations, and gathering more social support and political support for improving this problem. It's been really a pleasure. I look forward to seeing both of you in person again sometime as all this pandemic stuff winds down. I hope that time is coming soon. And I just really greatly appreciate you giving us some of your time today here at the Data Economics Festival. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you everyone in the audience for your great engagement, all of these fantastic questions. Really, really excited to keep working on this problem, and for all that you've educated me. So with that, have a wonderful day to both of you. Everyone watching, feel free to tune in to more Data Economics Festival content as the week goes on. Thank you very much.